Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's LinkedIn broadcast on sanctions and export controls. I just wanted to briefly wait for a couple of seconds until everyone is joining today's session. We have around 25 people who registered via LinkedIn. Just a quick update. Last week on Monday, we had to cancel the event because we had a time difference that we weren't aware of. The time changed at the end of, or a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and we had a conflict with the time. So it was canceled last minute. So for those of you who were waiting last week, our apologies. That's why today we are covering a couple of updates that I wanted to cover last week and didn't cover. So maybe we can just present the presentation that I will go through. So welcome again to everyone joining us today for our ACSS Sanctions and Export Controls broadcast. We do this broadcast every Monday at 9 a.m. New York time. So please join us also in the next couple of weeks for updates. This week, not a lot of Russia sanctions updates. There will be one because Canada actually imposed new sanctions on Russia. Then we will go through a couple of guidance documents that have been published, one by FATF, one by the EU, and one by OFAC, and also one by the DOJ actually last week. So let's just begin with the first update, the new Canada sanctions against Russia. So Canada last week, or actually already 10 days ago, has blocked the import of all aluminium and steel products from Russia, putting further financial pressure on Moscow over its military offensive against Ukraine. The Canadian government has imposed regulatory amendments under the Special Economic Measures regulations, which prohibits the importation of all Russian aluminium products. This covers unwrought aluminium, aluminium sheets, and other household items made from aluminium. The ban also applies to all primary Russian steel products, including iron and non-alloy steel, as well as semi-finished and finished products such as tubes and pipes. Just as a comparison to the Canada sanctions, I looked into sanctions by the US and the EU on aluminium. And actually, in February 2023, so just a month ago, the US announced a 200% tariff on aluminium and related products produced by Russian firms, effective 10 March, so 10 days ago. The EU does not restrict the import of Russian aluminium. It even provides exemptions for transactions involving sanctioned Russian state-owned enterprises, which are necessary for the purchase or import of aluminium. So you can see there's a difference in the sanctions imposed by Canada, the US, and the EU on aluminium. Let's move on to the next update, which was on the 10th of March. The FATF agreed on tougher global beneficial ownership standards in its recommendations, Recommendation 24, by requiring countries to ensure that competent authorities have access to adequate, accurate, and up-to-date information on the true owners of companies. The FATF has now updated the guidance that will help countries implement the revised Recommendation 24. Basically, the revised recommendation explicitly requires countries to use a multi-pronged approach, namely to use a combination of different mechanisms for collection of beneficial ownership information to ensure that adequate, accurate, and up-to-date information on the beneficial ownership of legal persons is available and can be accessed by the competent authorities in a timely manner. Let's move on to the next publication that we have seen also 10 days ago. On March 10th, the European Parliament published a new briefing entitled EU Sanctions on Russia, Overview, Impact, Challenges. The briefing provides a good timeline figure on the EU sanctions on Russia and a table with an overview of EU sanctions on Russia. It also explains in detail how to navigate the oil cap and oil embargo. The briefing discusses the degree of multilateral alignment around Russia's sanctions and the efficacy of their enforcement. And finally, the briefing provides statistics of the economic impact of sanctions on Russia. So, if you're interested in the Russia sanctions, I think that the briefing gives you a good overview of everything that happened since February last year when Russia invaded Ukraine. Next, we have a publication by OFAC and Repo on the 9th of March. OFAC and the multinational Russian elites, proxies, and oligarchs Repo task force published their global advisory on Russian sanctions evasion, issued jointly by the multilateral Repo task force. Shortly following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, the United States, and the European Commission launched the Repo Task Force, a multilateral effort that has used information sharing and coordination to isolate and exert unprecedented pressure on sanctioned Russian individuals and entities. Since its inception, the Repo Task Force has successfully used the respective authorities to track Russian sanctioned assets and heavily restrict sanctions individuals and entities from accessing the international financial system. And now this publication has been published to underscore the task force's commitment to work collaboratively with the private sector and to deny key Russian elites and proxies access to revenue and sensitive goods and technologies. So please download this global advisory by Repo to have an overview of typologies of Russian sanctions evasion. To give you a couple of examples how Russian sanctions evasion happens in practice, so you can also make sure that it doesn't happen through your company. And last but not least, I included an update today, which I saw last week. The US Department of Justice recently announced a series of updates to its guidance related to corporate compliance programs, including revisions to the evaluation of corporate compliance programs, and it announced a pilot program regarding compensation incentives and clawbacks, which they just call the pilot program. So two really interesting updates that we've seen from DOJ. Let me explain. First of all, for those of you who haven't heard of this document by the DOJ, the evaluation of corporate compliance programs, it actually exists already for many years, but is being updated constantly. The document is meant to assist prosecutors in making informed decisions as to whether or to what extent a corporation's compliance program is effective at the time of an offense. So basically, if you go through this document and you make sure that you fulfill and respect all of the requirements, you are in a better position to deal with the prosecutor when you commit an offense, basically violating the ITA. The guidance updates to the DOJ's continued evaluation of compliance programs continues its emphasis on the clawback or recoupment of compensation from employees in appropriate cases. Let me elaborate. So, according to the document, a hallmark of effective implementation of a compliance program is the establishment of incentives for compliance and disincentives for non-compliance. Prosecutors should assess whether the company has clear consequence management procedures in place, enforces them consistently across the organization, and ensures that the procedures are commensurate with the violations. The DOJ believes that a company should evaluate compliance factors when evaluating compensation arrangements. Basically, in my words, it means that now the DOJ also wants to know from your company if compliance factors have been included in your compensation and incentive policies. I interpret it personally as someone who within the company in senior management is actually including compliance factors in the compensation program with the company, basically proving to the prosecutors, if you commit an offense, that you actually have policies in place that support compliance, but also punish compliance at the higher level of a company's management. And also in relation to this, the DOJ announced a pilot program, which is called the Pilot Program Regarding Compensation Incentives and Clawbacks. The program directs prosecutors to reduce fines levied on companies by the amount of compensation a company recoups during the resolution period from employees engaged in wrongdoing. The program also gives prosecutors the discretion to reduce company fines by up to 25% of compensation a company has made good faith attempts to claw back, even if clawback is not successful during the resolution period. So basically, you can get a reduction of a fine by the DOJ or by the prosecutors if you can prove that you had a compensation policy in place, including compliance factors. So those were the updates that I had for you today. I hope they were helpful. Not a lot of Russia sanctions updates, as I said, except for the one that Canada published 10 days ago. Before I finish today's presentation, I just wanted to remind those of you who have not heard about our upcoming Global Sanctions and Export Control Conference happening in Amsterdam in the mid of May, 11th and 12th of May. So if you happen to be in Europe or you would like to visit us in Amsterdam in person and all other sanctions and export control professionals, please visit our website for more information on the program of the conference. Hope to see you in Amsterdam in May. And also a couple of webinars that are coming up, which you can join. On the 6th of April, we will discuss sanctions risks for the insurance industry. On the 20th of April, we will discuss preventing and detecting circumvention of EU trade restrictions via third countries. And on the 18th of May, we have a sponsored webinar by Polestar, which is free for everybody, also if you're not an ACSS member, entitled Maritime Trade Sanctions Compliance, Fact versus Fiction. So let me briefly take a moment to receive your questions on LinkedIn, which you can post in the comments right next to the broadcast. I didn't see any questions coming in, so I assume that nobody had any comments for today's presentation. Thank you so much for joining us. We were 27 people at the end. I'm really grateful for you attending our weekly broadcasts, and have a great week ahead of you, and hopefully see you next Monday.